delegitimization of Palestinian Christians. And if we refer back to the devotion we had this morning, I'm talking about stains. I'm talking about the types of pressures, the types of things that have been said, mostly by Christian Zionists, about Christian Palestinians, in light of things like Christ at the checkpoint, in light of Christian Palestinians speaking up. This is a reasonably new phenomenon for Christian Palestinians to be more active in speaking about the theology of the land and things like this. So, first of all, why is it important to me? Well, let's get one thing out of the way. I'm sort of guilty by association from the start, but those of you that have heard my dad speak many times, he always uses us boys to sort of as examples, and as a teenager I was so embarrassed. So now it's my turn. Although I really shouldn't be saying this with glee. During my BA, I missed the first two Christ at the checkpoint. Although I followed closely online, I followed what was being said, what the reactions were from different people, different leaders, and it was really interesting for me to see the language, the images, the symbols that people were using. So I decided to try and apply a little bit of the sociology and criminology skills that I had acquired and see what I could learn from the things that are being said. So try and imagine that you have a pastor in the land who puts Christian Arab leader says Israelis are like Nazis with a big Nazi flag next to it. Then you have a picture with a terrorist with a knife, and although you probably can't really see from the picture, there are Hamas tunnels in the background. So this raises the question, how are we supposed to react as Christians to these things? This is done by the body. So what is supposed to be our reaction? Now, why is it important to us as Christian Palestinians? Well, first of all, we want to preach the gospel and share our theology with the rest of the body. It is important for us to be part of the discourse, and these sort of attacks are trying to stop it. We want to share our narrative, to share our culture, to share our history. This is all important to us. A third thing is we want to speak out against injustice. This is part of who we are. Why is it important to you, people who are from overseas or in the country? The conflict has been exported to your governments, it's been exported to your media, your social media, and especially your churches. Churches take a very active role in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and therefore it should be more than just a point of interest, it's also a point of responsibility. So let's go into look at some of the sort of delegitimization and attacks. And when I say delegitimization, what I'm saying here is that it is a discrediting attempt. It's trying to avoid the argument by attacking you as a person. So while some of these will be just general sort of propaganda rhetoric, the evangelical church unfortunately tends to follow. So the first one, which I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with, and is the by far most common label used, is anti-Semitism. Now, anti-Semitism here isn't really used in the true sense of the word. It really isn't used in sort of the discrimination against Jews, but rather it's used as, if you don't accept my point of view, if you don't accept my theology, then you are anti-Semitic. And this is used as a way to distract from the main subject. So I could begin speaking about the wall, and at some point we will end up talking about anti-Semitism. So Noam Chomsky, he discusses the use of anti-Semitism in Harvard, where there was a discussion of how should Harvard react to the attacks in Jenin in 2002 where many civilians died. And someone brought up the issue of anti-Semitism, and then very quickly we can see for the next couple of months, the only issue around here is anti-Semitism in Harvard, which doesn't exist. Jenin disappeared and the Palestinians disappeared. And this is the danger that exists with the delegitimization, that the issues that we are bringing forward and we will be forgotten in light of this type of labeling. Second one is replacement theology. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, Munayer has already covered this really adequately, but But just to resonate this, it isn't replacement theology in the way it's understood in theological work. It's if you do not agree with my understanding of biblical scripture, that you are replacement theology, which then by definition means you are anti-Semitism, and we're back to square one. So this has been used constantly in an absolute manner. You are either in this sort of Christian Zionist camp, or you are either in the replacement theology. Now, one of the dangers here is that it is not only dehumanizing and even delegitimizing Christian Palestinians, but it's also dangerous for Jews who will suffer from real replacement theology, who will suffer from real anti-Semitism. And this is danger to the actual original use of the terms. Now, if I look into a lot of the rhetoric that is being said, and for those of you following online, I'm sure you've noticed that this conference is a little controversial. There's already a question mark on whether we are Christians at all, whether we actually believe in Jesus. It's as if that the issue of the land and the issue of chosenness is a precondition to salvation. Next one is terrorism supporters. This is an accusation that is sort of increasing over the past few years. It began with sort of, well, you're not really addressing terrorism enough. And then it's sort of, well, you're justifying terrorism. Now it's supporting terrorism. The next step, I'm sure you can imagine what that is. And when you put this label, it gives you almost the justification of removing the humanity from the other. And you can then do what you want. So Palestinian Christians have repeatedly condemned all forms of violence from both sides, yet these are turned and twisted within a certain agenda. Some Christian Zionists have even claimed that the very theology that is being discussed feeds into the attack on civilians. The next one that I want to discuss is Chrislam, or some form of Christianity and Islam. Basically, the claim here is that we have not been able to come up with this theology on our own. We must have been influenced by Muslims. In other words, when we wake up and we look at the situation around us, we couldn't have come to these conclusions alone. It must have come from Islam, which, from their point of view, is evil. Now, this is playing on the Islamophobia that, particularly in the West, that is sort of attempting to make us quiet. And if you're not able to make us quiet, then we'll just push you. We'll just push you into that category, because it's easier that way. I think that this is patronizing and even racist, that we are unable to come up, to try and produce something positive in our own situation. Some have even said that we are using Jesus as a form of jihad. So it's as if our Palestinian theology is feeding into Chrislam, and Chrislam is sort of feeding into Palestinian theology, and the conclusion is that we are opposing God's will. If we look at some of the literature that is being written about Palestinian Christians recently, I know it's a little difficult to see, so I'll try and explain. One is Christian Palestinianism, with the C as a crescent. The idea that, again, we are somehow promoting Islamic theology, or that we ourselves are Muslims in disguise. The one at the bottom is particularly strong. It's a Palestinian priest, you can't really see the collar, and is saying that we are waging an anti-Israel crusade, which is sort of ironic if you think of the use of words from the West. And then the third one is in Dutch, which claims that the Christian Palestinians are a continuation of the Nazi agenda. That what we are presenting is a continuation of the Nazi ideology that was built in Germany. So from this, we sort of see that we're being accused as Muslim Nazi terrorists who believe in replacement theology. And if you're not confused by that, then anyway. So let's look at some of the overall sort of general, I figured that we should also address some of the general delegitimizations of Palestinians here. It is not just a denial of our theology and faith, but it is also through just everyday life and politics. So the first one, I'm sure everybody's heard that there's no such thing as a Palestinian people. The second one, that there is no occupation. And the third one is you are lucky to be in Israel or the occupation. You could be living in Syria. Well, let's look at these one at a time. there's no such thing as a Palestinian people. This was presented to the Israeli Knesset by Likud member Anat Berko 3 weeks ago. This is how much it's being circulated. She said there could be no such place as Palestine because there is no P in Arabic. And I'm saying it's the equivalent of saying there's no such food as hummus in America because there is no ha in English. This is the equivalent. Now, as though this is sort of humorous, by taking away someone's identity, again, you're stripping their humanity. And this gives you, if Palestinians are not a people, therefore they don't deserve rights. Therefore we can do what we want. Well, my sort of story counters this. When I was in 5th grade at school, my teacher told me that the land was empty and there were no Palestinians before the Jews came. And when the Jews did come, then the Palestinians sort of joined along and have no serious contribution. Well, this church was built by my ancestors in the 18th century. So this is sort of our faith contribution to this land. And it's a very ancient contribution and very significant. The second one is a document that says that it was a letter written to my great-grandfather saying that the history of the Munayer family is traced to the 12th century. So, but then we don't have the letter P, so I guess the church must have built itself, and for 800 years my family must have been wandering around without any form of identity searching for this letter P. So, anyway, let's move on to the occupation. People say that there is no occupation. Let's bury this argument once and for all. The General Assembly have stated that the wall and settlements being constructed by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, is illegal. Now, Jonathan Kotab, is he here? Well, if he was here, he would have told me, well, you know, the UN is very biased against Israel, especially the General Assembly. There's many countries that don't like Israel, therefore, you know, we shouldn't take them seriously. But then the Security Council as well, in Resolution 242, used the language that the withdrawal of Israeli forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict. And for those of you that are not as familiar with the lingo, belligerent means military. So this isn't just by the Security Council, but Israel itself has signed the 242 document and accepted it. And if that's not convincing enough, let's look at the Israeli High Court of Justice, which I don't always agree with the decisions they make in the West Bank. But they say since 1967, Israel has been holding the areas of Judea and Samaria, as they call it, in belligerent occupation. The authority of the military commander is inherently temporary, as belligerent occupation is inherently temporary. So, can we move past this argument now? You know, and I think that a lot of the people that use this argument is not because this is not available, this information is not available, but it's meant to distract from the main points that are being raised, from the injustices that are being brought forth. The third one is a particularly important point. I don't hear this sometimes, I don't hear this many times, I hear this all the time. You are so lucky to live in Israel, and it's true. I benefit from a lot of things in Israel. I'm lucky not to be a Syrian refugee at the moment. I am even more privileged than my brothers and sisters in the West Bank with the type of economic health incentives that I have. But I think it's despicable to use the Syrian refugees' suffering to justify what is going on here. So it is the equivalent of someone punching me in the stomach repeatedly and saying, you are so lucky you're not being punched in the face like that person over there. And I think it's a particularly unhealthy way of approaching the conflict. One of my Israeli professors said that the way we should understand particularly the Israeli-Palestinian approach to this, is that when an Israeli-Palestinian wakes up in Haifa, he does not compare himself to someone in Yemen, he compares himself to his Jewish neighbor. If we're thinking about it in the occupied sense, when a Palestinian wakes up and turns his tap on to get water, he does not think of the water rates in Qatar, but compares it to the settlement next door that has swimming pools. To sort of affirm this point, I want us to look at this quote. The people who become so emotionally involved over the Israeli-Palestinian issue overlook the fact that the Arabs here earn higher wages, live in better homes, get better medical treatment, and have greater economic hopes for themselves and their children than any other Arabs in the region. If you destroy the strength of the Israelis here, then surely the Arabs themselves will recognize that their own prospects for prosperity and advancement must be immeasurably dimmed. This is an excuse that's used all the time. Now, this isn't the original quote. And before I go on to the original quote, I want to emphasize, I am not comparing and saying that these things are the same. All I'm looking at is structures of power and excuses that are used to justify the current systems. This is the original quote. And I feel that, again, I'm not comparing the apartheid system exactly. This is not the purpose of this discussion. But there certainly is the same sort of discussion happening over economic incentives compared to freedoms and compared to equality. This was said, by the way, by John B. Connolly, who was the former Republican candidate and former governor of Texas in a conference in South Africa in support of the apartheid system. Right, so we've looked at a lot of these sort of different delegitimizations. Let's go back to the question, why is it important to us? Well, because basically when we are trying to talk, when we are trying to engage, there is a monopoly over narrative. There is a monopoly over discussions, there's a monopoly over truth. There are only certain discussions that people want us to have and don't want us to engage in others. And if we stray from this sort of from this one narrative, then we are either ostracized or we delegitimized. So the goal for these people, and particularly certain Christian Zionist organizations and media outlets, is to shut down any dialogue about the situation. You can't question, meet, discuss opinions, and stray from their narrative. If you don't believe me, ask some of the international speakers that have come here and some of the pressures that they've been on. If you remember what Hank was sharing last night about what he's been through in light of him participating or trying to discuss theology in a different manner, this is exactly what we see. Also, we see the phenomenon of a foul in football. And I'm sorry, Americans, it is football, where you, thank you, John, where you play the man and not the ball. In other words, you attack the person, but you do not deal with the issue. It's so much easier to slander, and all of the Palestinian speakers have been, you can just Google their names to find out, have been slandered, and it's so much easier to attack them as people rather than dealing with the issues that they're bringing forth. So what is the consequence of this monopoly? What is the consequence of this activity? Well, Munayer and Sami have sort of already discussed it, where we've been uninvited and excluded from many different Palestinian Christian conferences, activities, churches, because of Christian Zionist pressure. This is a picture of Mubarak Awad, who was uninvited from Trinity Lutheran Seminary for a conference titled Seeking Peace in the Holy Land. Now you might say, well, maybe Mubarak's a troublemaker. Maybe he's not worth having at the conference. But there were no Palestinians present at the conference. How could you have a discussion on seeking peace in the Holy Land without Palestinians? Now, if we look at a further use of this monopoly, I call this the token Arab, and what some of you may be familiar with, the Uncle Tom. So the token Arab is saying, look, we have a native who will say what we want to say or agrees with us, and we will push him to the public platform and use him as a form to justify what we are doing. The Uncle Tom is sort of the submissive native, the one who doesn't speak up, even though he might not agree because he doesn't want to rock the boat. Now, where I differ perhaps a little bit with my approach than Munayer is, Munayer talks about imperialism. I'm talking about colonialism. So there's throughout all of history, particularly under the British, as they were experts in this, there is a colonial use of the natives to divide up the society. Colonials will use natives to sort of cause fighting amongst the local population, and they will use natives to justify their position. So for example, the British might build a train or a train track in one of the countries they were colonizing and say, look, we're helping the natives so much. when actually it was used to take natural resources. The same thing is being done here. There is sort of the taking of locals and saying, look, the wall is not tall because this man has said that it's not tall, and therefore it must be true. Or I have a Palestinian friend who said that there is no occupation, therefore there can't be an occupation. These are the type of arguments I'm talking about. From the Palestinian Christian perspective, and throughout colonial history, what is the incentive for this? The incentive is that they hope to benefit from wealth, power, prestige, and influence gained from the colonizers, and thereby retain or improve their social, political, or economic situation. Now, I am not saying that all the Palestinians that say are Christian Zionists or Palestinians that are pro-Israel are doing this for these reasons. It's very possible, and I'm sure there are people that really hold these opinions, and God bless them. The problem here is that people are using these and manipulating the discussion by taking these people who have these opinions and saying, this represents Christian Palestinian opinion and not what they're saying. It's a form of silencing of Christian Palestinians, and it is completely unacceptable. A second point is that there are financial and status exploitation. There are financial and status pressures put specifically by Christian Zionist organizations to stop Christian Palestinians from speaking up. So this could be withholding of finances. They can say, well, we want to support your ministry, we want to support your church, but you can't speak up about these issues. Please speak up about Islam. You can speak up about how you're being persecuted by Islam, but don't speak about the political situation. Don't speak up about checkpoints. You can complain that there is radicalism, you can complain that you're a minority, and some of these points are legitimate. But the point here is that there is almost a blackmailing tactic to shut people up. You might not get invited to all sorts of conferences that you want to go. You might not, old friends that you've had might suddenly question you. What do you think about Christ at the checkpoint? What is your opinion on the checkpoints? And then you have to make a difficult decision. So this is a message specifically to the Palestinian Christians here, and also elsewhere. We have a psychological imbalance of power. Are we going to submit, or are we going to speak up? Not because this is necessarily the only truth, but if you believe that what is going on is an injustice, if you believe it's an injustice, then what are you going to do? I'll leave that question to you. So one of the things that I've sort of been thinking about is what is your role as the internationals? And I don't know where he's sitting right now, but there you are. One of the international students asked, if the international community has played such a role in the conflict and in putting fuel on the fire, how can we be part of the solution? And I think that the international community here is more than just a positive role, more than just sort of a bonus. I think we need you to help us come to a solution when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So a lot of this is quite heavy. A lot of this is even a little bit depressing to see the type of slander and attacks. And if you've gone through the amount of online nonsense blogs and news things, then it is very tiring and draining. And it's very difficult to speak positively and try and celebrate what we have. So what I'm going to say is, how can we speak positively in this situation? What is my message here? Am I just going to complain about the fact that we're under multiple pressure? No, let's try and do something more positive. Well, first of all, I think we need to declare that what we are seeing here, all these different attacks, whether the labeling of anti-Semitism or the use of money to pressure people, is a form of religious extremism. This is exactly what we've been talking about in the conference. Now, it is more than just religious extremism. It's more than just the inability to take in new information and, to react almost in a militaristic type way. It's feeding into the occupation. It's feeding into the sort of attempt to cause us to submit. And my question for all of you is, what is the role we want our churches to play in this conflict? Do we want voices that use such violent imagery Do we want the type of nasty attacks where people feel like they are allowed to just attack people personally in such a way? Or do we want to have a more positive message, especially when we disagree? Second thing I will say is Christian Palestinians are by no means perfect. We are by no means perfect. And Christ at the Checkpoint is by no means perfect. We need your help to continue and improve our theology, continue and improve our intellectual discussion on what is going on around us. And we want to do this without further attack. How can we do it without further polarizing each other? How can we have more positive discussion? And we need you to help us demonstrate positive ways of having this discussion. One of the highlights of last conference, certainly for me and a lot of people, was the discussion between Gary Burge and Dan Juster. If you haven't seen it, please go and watch the video. Not because of any theological conclusion that they came to necessarily. That was of less interest to me. What I was sort of touched by was how respectful they were of each other. That was the first time I had ever seen a theological discussion on the land done in such respect, done with listening, and this is what I want to see happen here. I want to see us sort of imitate this type of discussion. I want to see us have this type of discussion in the land where we clearly don't agree, but we are going to respect each other and sort of reinforce each other's humanity rather than delegitimizing it. Right. So finally, if you see yourself connected to the issues here, and if you've been touched by the things that you've seen and heard, speak up. We need further voices speaking positively into what is going on here. We need you. We could have had this conference just with locals, but we need the international community to be an active part in what's going on here. And as sort of the activist Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. So we need you to help sort of break down the structures of power that already exist, especially within the church. Second of all, the second quote, I don't know if you can read it, I'll try and make it so everyone can hear. If we wash our hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless, then we are siding with the powerful. We do not remain neutral. Being silent does not keep you neutral. Putting your head down does not keep you neutral. It puts you with the powerful. Now, I'm not saying that the Christian Palestinians here are powerless, but clearly we have lots of different pressures that are against us. We're a minority within our own communities. We're under pressures from the conflict itself, whether it's the occupation or racial discrimination. And when people stay silent about these issues, it is not because you're just forgetting about it and not being involved. It's allowing these systems to continue to exist. So, if we go back to my final point. If you do choose to speak up about what you've seen, if you do want to challenge some of the things that we've discussed throughout the conference and these power structures and these attacks, let's do it just like John Azuma said, without becoming radicalized ourselves. The danger here is that when we see these attacks, when we've been put under this pressure, is that we ourselves will respond negatively, and we can't afford to do that. We do not want to do unto others what they are doing unto us. We don't want to advocate while demonizing and dehumanizing the other side or people that hold the opposite opinions of us. And finally, let me just ask this question. What is your message to me? Or to echo what the young adult Christian Palestinians asked last night. What are you trying to say what is your voice for the young Palestinian Christians? Is your voice that we have to deal against all these different odds that are against us, yet when we try and speak up that we get put down? Is this the message that we want that you want to tell us? Or is it something else? And so I just want to leave you with that. If anything from this talk is just to think, what is your message going to be to the young people here? Because one of the things that we've found in the conference for the young adults is that there was a complete absence of hope amongst a lot of the young people. So someone said that they're neither optimistic or pessimistic, but they have hope. We need that hope, because we don't even have that. So thank you very much for listening, and God bless.